Good afternoon and welcome to the hobby table in my apartment. What I have on the bench today, or the table today, is an assortment of carbs and my Webra Speed 61 engine. Now those of you that watched my last video regarding the Webra Speed 61 engine, this engine where I ran two props, and it was a run after replacement ring, after I replaced the ring on it. I had mentioned that I wasn't real happy with the carb that came with it. Wasn't certain if the needles in it were stock at all. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to zoom in real quick a bit and just show you. Here's the Webra Speed 61 engine, and I'm hoping to try to stay on topic, but I really don't have a set discussion for this other than to say that I'm going to try some different carbs on this engine. But so just so you can see, this is a pretty decent engine. It's in good shape. It's got really good compression now that it had a break-in run with that new ring. But what I've got here is an assortment of carbs. Now, a couple days ago, I don't know, it was probably on Sunday, probably the day after I ran the engine, I sent out a text to my buddy in Florida, Harvey, and said, hey man, because he's been working on RC glow engines and many other types of engines, boat engines, car engines, for many years. And so he's got all kinds of experience. He works on glow engines for a local hobby store, so I mean, he's the man. And he's got a ton of spare parts. In fact, he was the person that I gave a lot of my engines to when I left Florida, when I just was running out of time, couldn't sell them or whatever. So anyway, I texted him and said, hey, do you have a carb that'll fit these dimensions? And I had my caliper out and I actually, just measured the opening or the base on the Webra carb. And he's like, oh, I don't know, let me go through. And he said he's got like 2 boxes, 10 pounds each of carbs. And I was like, well, with that amount of carbs, he's definitely got something. So he found some carbs, and I'll show you each one of the carbs that he sent me individually. Now, this video is not intended to be a discussion on the different types of carbs, whether it be a fuel mixture, a metering carb, or an air bleed carb, because I've got 2 different videos on that already. But what I want to show you here is all the different carbs I've got. And the only carbs that I've got here are ones that specifically fit this engine. I probably had some other carbs I could have shown, but for the subject of this engine, I'm only showing the ones that have the potential, or that not have the potential, that fit this engine and have the potential of being run on this engine, because this was really kind of a small opening. I think it was like right on 1/2 inch, or as measured maybe like 12.82 millimeters. It was an oddball shape, or an oddball size compared to, well, like my ASP 61 engine is the carb opening and the carb is massive compared to this. This has got an opening and a mounting location or a mounting size that's more indicative of 40 size engines, which is what you're going to see here, which I think is rather interesting. So anyway, the first carb I'm going to show you here is this Enya carb. And I don't know if I want to zoom in a little bit more so you can see these a little bit better. This is the Enya carb that came off my Enya 45 ball bearing engine. Now, this happens to be an air bleed carb. This is the air bleed screw. That's the air bleed opening. So essentially what this carb does, and I think you can see right through there, what this carb does is it meters airflow into the carb as opposed to metering fuel as far as low speed settings. So this is an example of an air bleed carb, and before, when I was contacting Harvey, I kind of forgot I had this engine. And this engine, or this carb, does actually fit very well here. Now, I'm not sure how it's gonna do with the holes in there like that. I don't know how that's gonna work. So this one might not be necessarily one that I actually try to run this engine with. Just because of the fact that this carb was held in by 2 screws, and I'm not sure if these set screws are not really intended to be there to clamp into a hole or to screw into a hole. So I'm not sure how that one's going to work. So that one, although it fits, it may not be an example of one that's going to get run. And I'm having some difficulties here. So this next carb here, as you can see, is an ASP carb. This is a brand new carb that came with the ASP46 ABC engine that I just put a video out on. So this carb has never actually been mounted to anything. I did drop it in this thing just to see if it would fit. But I was surprised that this thing, it does fit this engine very well. And it's designed to be clamped in place in a similar fashion. So this is probably one I'm going to actually try and run this engine with just to see. So I guess what I'm saying here is that I'm probably going to have a whole video series on this engine and running different carbs on it, just because I've got carbs that fit it now, and we'll see what happens. And it would be kind of an interesting, I think, if you people that are watching this think that this would be an interesting set of videos, let me know. And then you can also vote for the carbs that I use in the comments also. So that's the ASP carb. And I was really shocked that a 46 or 40 size carb would have fit on a 60 size engine, but it did. Now here's the first carb that I'm going to show you that Harvey sent me. This, as soon as I saw this, I know what the hell this carb is. I think Harvey said he thought it was an OS carb, but because he said he was sending me a this, and an OS carb. Well, it turns out this is not an OS carb at all by any stretch of the imagination. Those of you that are familiar with the late 1970s might recognize this. This is actually the carb off of an RJL, or a Craft, I should say, a Craft 61 engine. And I know because I had several of those Craft 61 engines, and if you don't believe me, go and search my channel, look up those engines, and you'll see me actually tuning with a carb just like this. So this is actually a carb from a Craft 61 engine. And the thing that's interesting about this is it's got a high-speed needle and a low-speed needle, and they're not opposing. They're right here. So that's interesting in that the barrel is retained here by this nut on the end of the throttle control section. So this is kind of an interesting carb. I never had any issues with it. I mean, I only ran my RJL or Craft 61 engine a few times. I don't know exactly how many times I've got it running on the, I had a couple of them, but they seem to run pretty well. So this one actually fits very well also. So this one would be kind of an interesting one to run. Now I'm not going in and measuring the opening of the barrels as far as the rotating barrel. These openings here are all kind of slightly different on the top because some flare out, some taper in. So that's really not a good judge of the throat. But let's see here. They all may have comparable throats. Now this carb is a Webra carb. This is the Webra Dynamics carb that was actually on the Speed 91 engine that I gave to Harvey. And here's exactly the reason why he didn't like this carb and he took it off that engine, because you could pull this damn thing out. And I still, I've got an entire video of a look inside of doing this carb, this exact carb, and explaining the things I thought about it, and I took it all apart and all that kind of stuff. So you can go watch that video. When he told me he had this, and I remembered giving him that engine, I was like, oh yeah, I'd really like to have that carb back because that would be cool to put on this. And of course, now in that video, and for that 91 engine, it had an adapter on it. And that adapter was such that it made this part larger. So I'm not sure if that meant that this was actually designed, this particular carb was actually for a 61, and they just adapted it and said, well, we're not going to change the size of the casing of the carb, so we're just going to make an adapter for it. I don't know. All I know is obviously this carb will operate on this engine, but I'm running into the same issues that I had before, where it just doesn't want to do the same thing. And if you want more explanation on that, just go and watch that video where I talk about and show this Dynamics carb in action. Now when I ran that 91, I don't know that I really had any issues other than a little bit of strange mechanical binding, but I believe the last video of that was an excellent one, and it was a really good run. Now the next carb here is the carb that came with this Webra Speed 61 engine. It's called the TN carb, or twin needle carb. Even Enya uses that acronym many times describing their carbs, TN, twin needle. Now, this one is the one that I wasn't certain was stock or not, or I mean the needles were stock, because this high-speed needle seemed like for it to operate properly, it was like damn near screwed completely out, and it wouldn't even it wouldn't really stay in there. Now, I don't know about, let's see, we can kind of maybe get into some of these design features of carbs. If you're looking straight into that carb, on this side, the right-hand side, that's actually the high-speed needle that you're seeing there. And then there's a gap. And then I guess the left-hand side, you would say that's the spray bar. Well, that high-speed needle goes into that spray bar, so it's hollow. And then this needle has a sharp, very sharp point that tapers. And in theory, it is possible to screw this and this all the way in so that they touch, and then you could damage the tip of this needle, which I think is a really, really poor design. I don't like that design at all, because I've seen engines before that had similar type designs, and the needle is damaged. So yeah, I don't know about that. Now, I'll get to this last carb here in a second. This is another example of a different type of carb spray bar setup. So you can see, you just see basically a solid line through there. And that solid line is the spray bar. Now, it's not really possible with my camera and the lights, but on the underside of this spray bar, on this side, there's a slit, or an opening, the tapered opening. This is very much like the Super Tiger Mark 10 carb, I think it is, the Super Tiger carbs, where you've got that cat's eye opening on the bottom. Now on the Super Tiger carb, you can sit there and you can rotate and move that spray bar to adjust the orientation of the opening of that slit for better fuel flow, and that assists in the mid-range. And I think I've got some videos talking about that also, at least tuning that engine. So in this one, the high-speed needle goes through that portion, and then, or the high-speed needle is on this side, it goes through that, and the low speed also kind of goes in there, and they don't, when they meet, they don't touch, but the tapered opening closes based on how much each one is in there. So they don't have the means to touch, and both of the needles are pointed. So that's just kind of a quick and dirty thing on how you'll see carbs of various different designs. And so here's the Enya carb. I'm trying to get that. And you can see a similar type of thing. Now keep in mind, this is an air bleed carb, and you're only seeing the portion of it protruding in there, and that's just the high speed, or the spray bar area, or the mount for the high speed needle. There's really not a spray bar per se in this, because what we're doing, we're not metering fuel on an air bleed carb, we're metering air. The more air that goes into the carb via how open this hole is, or how recessed or open, pulled out this screw is, the more air that goes in the carb tends to lean the fuel mixture, and the more closed it is and the less air that it allows in there, the richer it makes the fuel mixture at low speed. So those are design considerations there. Now this final carb is a Perry carb. I have this one. Harvey told me, he said this is, this one's had its better days. In fact, it probably should not have this kind of in-play in it. This carb is not going to be in the running. I'm not even really going to bother putting this carb and trying to run it on this engine unless I just get super bored someday. But it doesn't, the fitment isn't quite as good as the others. The others feel a little bit better. And if I feel any kind of wiggling at all, like I'm feeling with this Craft one, what I'll probably end up doing is wrapping that with some Teflon tape. But this is a whole nother beast too, and I am not that familiar with Perry carbs. K&B used them quite a bit, and then K&B also had some type of Perry carb also, or the same kind of design where the mixture is done by this little disc on the side here. I'm not sure if I've ever disassembled a pericarb before, but maybe in a future video this will be something to talk about there. But those are the 6 carbs that I have that fit the Webra Speed 61 engine. Now, the only ones that I am at this moment considering using in the video, the new video series, is the Dynamics carb, obviously, because that's a Webra carb. That should work perfectly. The ASP carb, and then maybe this K&B, or not K&B, this Kraft or RJL carb, because I think that would be kind of interesting to see, especially this one would probably be the last one. I would probably do this Dynamics first, see if we can get this engine running perfectly with that, then go to the ASP carb, and then do this at the end. Now, I've already got a video showing this carb. This is the stock carb that came with the Webra Speed, and at the end of that video I think I showed that I had this thing running pretty well. This Enya carb, I'm not entirely sure about how it would mount and seal with it being pre-drilled like this. And of course this pericarb, like I said, I'm not sure I'm going to mess with this at all. Harvey had a couple of these, and he said one of them didn't have this kind of end play in it. I don't know if it's just supposed to have a spring in there or what. Either way, I don't have a spring for it. So that is your Webra Speed 61 carbs video for the day. And hopefully, if I can get into the flying field tomorrow, we've got a lot of snow melting, so it's going to be really sloppy and muddy. If I can get into the flying field tomorrow, I plan on putting this thing on the stand and having at least one, if not 2 of these carbs run on that engine here very soon.